What's up, guys? The Comics Kid 2099 here. I am wearing my Magneto Was Right t-shirt that I got for Christmas, and I'm going to be doing 5 videos right here back to back to back, and then I'm going to be putting them up over the span of the next few weeks. So if you're wondering why is he wearing the same shirt as he was in those other videos, that's why. I always do that, but I'm filming a lot more videos now than I usually do in one sitting. So anyway, we're going to see how that goes. Today, I wanted to talk to you about Essential Daredevil Volume 2. It's been about 8 months since I did a review on Volume 1. Way back when I finished reading Volume 1 and reviewing it, I did not mean to wait that long to do Volume 2. Part of that is just that I've got a lot of stuff that I read and review, and I just kind of got lost in the shuffle and forgot to finish Daredevil Volume 2 and read it and review it. Also, this volume, this may be a little bit telling for the later part of this review, but it wasn't as good as Volume 1, or at least it wasn't as easy for me to finish reading it as Volume 1, and so it was kind of easier for me to forget it and read some other stuff. But anyway, I'm not going to get to that just yet. First of all, I want to say sorry that it's taken me 8 months to get to Volume 2 of this. I do plan to get to Volume 3 a little sooner than 8 months from now. We'll just see how that goes. I hope I can get to it a little sooner than 8 months from now. And now on to the review itself. Volume 1, and incidentally, I am going to be comparing Volume 2 to Volume 1 quite a bit. Volume 1 was a lot more inconsistent with the art, and what I mean by that, I don't mean that the art was bad, I mean that there were 4 artists over the span of the 25-something issues collected in Volume 1. You had Bill Everett, Jack Kirby, John Romita Sr., and finally Gene Colan, I'm still not sure how to say his name. And so, while all of those artists were fantastic, every single one of them were really great, it was still inconsistent. This volume, Volume 2, it's all done by Gene Colan. So I want to say right off the bat that the art is a lot more consistent in this volume. So if art is more important to you than story is, then you might like this volume more than you liked Volume 1, just because it's consistently one artist from beginning to end, with the exception of one issue of Fantastic Four that's collected here, which is drawn by Jack Kirby. But all of the issues of Daredevil are drawn by Gene Colan. So if that's your thing, if you really like art, and you really like art that's all by one artist throughout a single story or a single book, then you're going to like this because it's almost all by Gene Colan. The story, however, I don't know if it's better or worse than Volume 1. I think Volume 1 feels a little bit more fresh than this volume does. Volume 1 introduces a lot of new characters, and they're not all winners. In fact, a lot of them are kind of awful. Volume 1 introduces the Purple Man, the Stilt Man, and the Masked Marauder. None of those guys are especially inspired characters. In fact, all of them are kind of terrible and awful. I know a lot of people really love the Stilt Man. He is by far my least favorite supervillain, period. I don't really like the Purple Man, and I know a lot of people like him because Brian Michael Bendis has used him to some effect in some of the stories since the year 2000. But in those stories in Daredevil in the 1960s, those characters are kind of terrible. But at least Volume 1 was trying to create new characters and do new things. Volume 2, it seems like it was doing a lot more of, oh, we need a supervillain for this issue, let's borrow a character from an issue of Thor, or an issue of Spider-Man, or an issue of the Fantastic Four. There is like a solid third of this book, 1/3 of all of this, is Daredevil fighting characters from other comic books. There's a 2-part story where the Trapster from the Fantastic Four tries to steal Daredevil's costume and infiltrate the Fantastic Four headquarters to fight the Fantastic Four. And then there's a 3-part story, a 3 or 4-part story, and that includes the issue of the Fantastic Four that I mentioned earlier. There's like a 3-part story where Dr. Doom switches bodies with Daredevil. And there is a huge section of this book. There's like a 2-parter where Mr. Hyde and the Cobra, they are fighting Daredevil for some reason, and they are, or at least Mr. Hyde is a Thor character from the 60s. There's a lot of characters from other comic books in the Marvel Silver Age that this series is borrowing from. There's not nearly as much invention of new characters, and you might be saying, well, if the characters that Volume 1 gave us, like the Purple Man, the Stilt Man, and the Masked Marauder, were so terrible, then why do you want this book to invent new characters if they're just going to be that bad? Yeah, you've got a good point, but I would rather a book try to invent new characters and end up creating really terrible characters than just be lazy and borrow characters from other books. And Daredevil, at this point in time, most of his rogues gallery were characters borrowed from other books. In fact, I would say a lot of this book is that. You do get the Jester introduced here, and I said this on my Facebook page. He is, at this point, I've read 2 volumes of Essential Daredevil. He is my favorite Daredevil villain. He is easily the most competent villain that Daredevil has fought so far. He might give the Owl a run for his money, or rather the Owl might give the Jester a run for his money, but reading this 3 or 4 part story with the Jester, I really got the feeling that Daredevil actually had to try to beat the Jester. It wasn't just a situation of he's laughing and he doesn't have any trouble fighting these guys like most of the other villains that he fought here. Some of these guys, like the Unholy Three, I never got the feeling that Daredevil ever really had any trouble fighting those guys. But with the Jester, he actually had a challenge in fighting that guy, and I really like that character. And I get the feeling that there's a certain point in the book, after like that 1/3 of the book where he's fighting Dr. Doom and the Trapster and the Unholy Three, after that 1/3 of really, really awful comics, this book suddenly gets really good. Now, admittedly, when I say that the book is good, what I actually mean is it's good compared to the rest of this series, and also compared to some of the other stuff going on in the Silver Age at Marvel. I've said before that when you look at the 1960s of Marvel Comics, there were really only 2 series that were actually really good, and that was Spider-Man and the Fantastic Four. Pretty much everything else was just a pale comparison to those 2 books. Daredevil is a very good example of that. A lot of this book really feels like Stan Lee is just phoning it in because, well, he probably was just phoning it in. When he's writing everything at Marvel Comics, something has to give, and it kind of feels like he was really putting a lot of effort into Spider-Man and the Fantastic Four, and then at some point it just clicked with him, hey, maybe I should put a little bit more effort into Daredevil. And that's right around the point when the Jester is introduced, and suddenly a lot of the angsty subplot stuff that's been fueling this book for most of this volume kind of suddenly gets kicked into overdrive, and stuff actually starts happening with Karen Page and Matt Murdock's dual identity situation and Foggy Nelson running for DA. A lot of that stuff was kind of meandering throughout most of this volume, and then suddenly, right there towards the last third of this book, it all starts to get really good. Again, as I say, in comparison to the rest of this series that I've read so far. If you have read, say, the Frank Miller stuff and the Ed Brubaker stuff and the Bendis stuff, and you really like that stuff, and then you read this stuff, you might say, well, that's not really good, that's really terrible. Again, I'm saying it's really good in comparison to what I've read. I think it's pretty enjoyable just because I was reading some really terrible Daredevil stuff. Now, you might say, well, it sounds like you're giving this book a backhanded compliment. Yeah, I guess I am, but again, I really hated about 1/3 of this book, maybe even more than 1/3 of this book. It was astoundingly terrible. It was a big reason why I stopped reading this book for like 8 months and went to read other stuff. Now that I'm enjoying this, I'm not going to wait that long to read Volume 3. On the one hand, I'm kind of condemning this book with some low praise. On the other hand, I'm kind of praising this book for finally getting its act together and finally getting good right there towards the end of this volume. I am really looking forward to reading Volume 3 much more than I was looking forward to reading most of this volume as I was reading it. So that's kind of why I say that I think it's going to be less than 8 months before I get to Volume 3. Again, we'll see, because even if I'm really enjoying this stuff, it takes a while to read that much comic book stuff. So those are my admittedly very scattered thoughts on Volume 2. I did enjoy the last third of this volume. The rest of it, not so much. But if you are a fan of the really goofy, really silly, most of the time really dumb stuff from the Silver Age, you'll probably really love this volume. If you like art a lot more than you like story, you'll almost definitely love this volume. At least you'll probably like it more than Volume 1. And I think that's about all I have to say about this volume of Essential Daredevil Volume 2. I hope that you guys liked this review. If you did, be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe. And I will be back later with a different kind of video. I'm not really sure when I'm going to be putting this up since I'm filming a whole bunch of these back to back. So you'll see me sometime in the future with another kind of review. So in the meantime, I hope that you guys have a great rest of the day. Catch you later.